Hi, last time we were tuning up these inexpensive hinges. This time we're going to be mortising them in top and bottom of the doors and on the cabinet and fitting the doors. To mark out for the knife hinges, I set my doors on the cabinet where they're going to go. I've got some spacing behind them here and I've flushed up the edges with the cabinet, and I just mark lightly with a pencil the position of the door, and we do that both sides. And we also mark the inside of the door. I've put a centre line in for where this hinge position is going to be. And now I can position the hinge, making sure that the centre of the pivot lines up with the outside of the case. And now I'll do that with some double stick tape on the back, which will hold it in place whilst I knife round it. So now that it's sticky, it becomes a little bit more tricky. Now I'll go round and lay out these for all the corners, stick them on, then I can take the cabinet apart and knife round when it's just on the board on its own, and that'll be a lot easier. So now I carefully scribe round the hinge, and I'll mark just inside the cabinet the number of the hinge that's going there. In this case it's number 1. And then we'll chop that out in the normal way with some chisels, and we can even use a miniature router plane to get in there. To mortise out for the hinges, we first mark around them with a scalpel. Make a deep enough line to get a chisel edge in. Then we'll remove the hinge. Remember, we had the double-sided tape on it. I'll take the hinge and just mark down a depth on the very end where it comes through the board. Again with the knife. And then we can start to chisel out. So place it in the line that I've just scribed. Give it a little knock, and then take a longer chisel, go along the length of the hinge, feed it into the line, extend it to where the radius starts, and then we can start to remove material. If it's soft enough, I can just pare this. When we get to the curve, we can't remove as much material. I like to ease it a bit by taking out the central part. Now I'll take a gouge as close to the radius as I can get for the hinge. Just take a few stabbing cuts around the knife line. and then break that material away with a smaller chisel. Now I can go back and just deepen that mortise a little bit. Then I come in with a router plane and just finish off to depth. But of course you can just continue with chisels. With the hinges attached to the cabinet top and base, we now turn our attention to the doors. And thankfully, because we centralised the hinge on the top and base according to where the door was going to lay, to lay out on the doors we simply need to centralise the hinge on their thickness. Now we position the other half of the hinges on the doors in the middle of their thickness and with the pivot hole halfway overlapping the end of the door. Then we take our scalpel again and outline our hinge. And then we can chop out the mortise for this half of the hinge. Clamping in this fashion, or clamping with some blocks level with the top of the door, bottom of the door, will allow us to use the router plane again and give us plenty of surface area for it. This is where a small router plane is very handy, and we just remove material a little at a time until we've mortised down to the correct depth. You could of course do this with an electric router, and if you don't have a router of any description, then you could do it with chisels. Eventually it's fitted nice and flush. When we fit it to the cabinet, we may need to make very slight adjustments to how far along the door it goes, just to get the pivot point exactly right. And we can shim those with little pieces of paper below the line where we'll be able to see them, or if we have to push the hinge a bit deeper, we can just cut a small slither off the end there to push it in a bit further. When the door's hanging right, we can then drill and attach with screws. We have the hinges temporarily fitted into the bottom and the top of the case, and then slip the door with its mortise onto the two hinges, and I'm checking for flush with the side of the cabinet all up the side, and I'm also checking for a consistent gap between the door and the cabinet. And on this one here I can see that I'm flush at the bottom, and if I'm pushing the door hard back on the hinge here, I'm very slightly proud. I'll put a little bit of packing into the mortise, test again, and when it's right then I can put a central screw fitting in both of these hinges, take the screw out, put the hinges back on here, push the door on again, and then put those screws in for a final check. And if that's all alright, I can finish drilling the rest of the holes for the screws. So that's fitted the top hinge with a temporary screw. Now if we put the cabinet on its back, we can put a screw in the bottom hinge. So there we have our cabinet door nicely hinged. I shall be putting very thin clear plastic washers on the pivots there. I think you can see it works very well. So join me next time when I'll have both doors fitted and we can look at some finishing little touches for the cabinet.